Before I even begin to unravel this whole sorry saga, let me just say, when you spend your life pouring your heart and soul into your child, you expect, at the very least, not to be actively harmed by them in your twilight years. My son, Mark, well, he apparently had other ideas. He decided I was an inconvenience, a fading light he wished to dim further, and the method he chose was insidious, cruel, and nearly broke me. He replaced my heart medication, the very pills keeping my 68-year-old ticker going, with placebos. Sugar pills. Little white lies that could have cost me my life. But I wasn't quite ready to fade away, not on his terms anyway. This is the story of how I found out, how I fought back, and how I ultimately replaced him and his suffocating presence with a piece of paper that screamed my independence, a restraining order. And let me tell you, the peace that followed was worth every single tear I shed, every sleepless night I endured, and every ounce of courage I had to dredge up from a well I thought had run dry. My life hadn't always been a precursor to such drama. For 35 years, I was married to a good man, Arthur. We built a life, a home, a family. Mark was our only child, doted on perhaps too much. Arthur passed 10 years ago now, from a sudden illness that shook my world to its core. But I carried on. I had the house, a comfortable, if not extravagant, pension, and my memories. Mark, by then, was married to Diane, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, at least not when she looked at me. They lived a town over, busy with their own lives, their careers. Mark was some sort of mid-level manager in a logistics company, and Diane sold real estate, always dressed to the nines, always smelling faintly of expensive perfume and ambition. After Arthur died, Mark's visits became more frequent at first. "Just checking on you, Mom," he'd say, his voice laced with a concern that, in retrospect, felt performative. Diane would accompany him sometimes, perching on the edge of Arthur's favorite armchair as if it might contaminate her. They'd ask about my health, my finances, always in that order. I had developed a mild heart condition a few years after Arthur's passing, arrhythmia, my doctor called it. Nothing immediately life-threatening, as long as I took my medication religiously. A little pink pill every morning, a small, white one every evening. They kept the palpitations at bay, kept my breathing even, kept me feeling, well, normal. Mark made it his business to know about these pills. He'd ask if I needed refills, offer to pick them up from the pharmacy. I thought it was caring. I thought it was the action of a dutiful son. Oh, how wrong I was. The sacrifices I'd made for that boy. Working part-time when he was young so I could be there for school pickups, for scraped knees, for fevers in the night. Giving up that art course I'd always dreamed of because his college tuition fees were steeper than we'd anticipated. Arthur and I had always put Mark first. It was what parents did, or so I believed. I never kept a tally, never expected repayment. Love isn't a ledger, but a little human decency, a little respect for the woman who brought you into the world and nurtured you, that I felt wasn't too much to ask. The house, our home, was filled with memories of his childhood. His height marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe, the slightly faded patch on the living room carpet where he'd obsessively played with his toy cars, the attic still holding boxes of his school reports and art projects. These weren't just things. They were testament to a life lived, a family cherished. And it was within these walls, surrounded by these memories, that his betrayal began to unfold, silent and chilling. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A little more tired than usual. A faint fluttering in my chest that I dismiss as stress or indigestion. I'd mention it to Mark during one of his weekly calls. "You're probably just overdoing it, Mom," he'd say, his voice smooth, reassuring. "Maybe you should rest more." Diane, if she was on extension, would chime in with something about how, at your age, these things happen at my age. As if 68 was ancient, 1 foot in the grave. I prided myself on my independence. I still drove, tended my small garden, met my friend Sarah for coffee once a week. I wasn't ready to be written off. But the symptoms worsened. The fluttering became more insistent, sometimes a hard thumping that would leave me breathless. Walking to the local shop, a trip I usually enjoyed, became an ordeal. I'd have to stop several times, leaning against a wall or a lamppost, waiting for my heart to settle. I mentioned it to Dr. Evans, my GP, during a checkup. He frowned, listened to my chest, checked my blood pressure. "Are you taking your medication regularly, Eleanor?" he asked, his gaze keen. "Of course, doctor," I replied, a little affronted. "Every morning, every evening. Just like you prescribed." He adjusted the dosage slightly, told me to monitor it, and come back if things didn't improve. They didn't. In fact, they got worse. The fatigue was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. My ankles started to swell. Sarah, during one of our coffee mornings, looked at me with open concern. "Ellie, you don't look well at all," she said, her usually cheerful face etched with worry. "Are you sure those pills are working?" Her question, so innocent, planted a seed of unease. Of course, they were working. Why wouldn't they be? They were from the pharmacy, prescribed by my doctor. Mark often picked them up for me now. He said it saved me the trip, especially since I wasn't feeling up to par. He'd bring them over, sealed, from Thompson's Pharmacy, our local. He'd even started decanting them into my weekly pill organizer, to make it easier for you, Mom, such a thoughtful son. Or so I kept telling myself, even as a tiny, niggling doubt began to sprout in the back of my mind, a poisonous little weed I tried to ignore. I remembered one occasion, a few weeks prior, when he'd brought the new batch. He seemed a bit flustered, dropping the paper bag on the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. "Here you go, Mom. All sorted." I'd thanked him, and he'd changed the subject quickly, asking about a leaky faucet I'd mentioned. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, Sarah's words echoed. The pills themselves looked identical. Same size, same color. Or were they? Was the pink one a shade paler than I remembered? Was the white one a fraction smaller? I chided myself for such fanciful thoughts. This was Mark, my son. He couldn't. But the doubt, once sown, began to grow, its roots reaching into the foundations of everything I believed about my child. The turning point, the moment that tiny, niggling doubt blossomed into a horrifying certainty, came on a Tuesday. I remember it was raining, a relentless, dismal drizzle that mirrored the growing grayness in my spirit. Mark was due to visit that afternoon, ostensibly to fix that leaky faucet he'd been promising to look at for weeks. I was feeling particularly dreadful. My chest was tight, and every breath felt like an effort. I'd taken my morning pill, the little pink one, and if anything, I felt worse. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the rain-streaked window, when my gaze fell upon the recycling bin. Mark had emptied it into the larger outdoor bin on his last visit, but a stray pharmacy bag had fallen out and lay crumpled near the bottom. Idly, I reached for it, intending to toss it properly. It was from Thompson's, my usual pharmacy. But as I smoothed it out, something caught my eye. A receipt, still tucked inside. I pulled it out. It was dated from 3 days prior, the day Mark had supposedly picked up my latest refill. It listed several items: a bottle of multivitamins, some cough syrup, a tube of antiseptic cream. But not my heart medication. Neither the pink pill nor the white one was on the list. A cold dread, far more chilling than the damp air, seeped into my bones. My heart began to pound, a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. Maybe he'd gone to a different pharmacy for my prescription? But he always used Thompson's. It was closest to his route from work. I rummaged through the kitchen drawer where I kept old receipts and pill boxes. I found an empty box of my amlodipine, the pink pill. It clearly stated Thompson's Pharmacy. Then I found one for the bisoprolol, the white one. Also Thompson's. My hands were trembling. I took out my current pill organizer, the one Mark had so diligently filled. I popped out that morning's pink pill, or what was left of it. I often took them with a sip of water, and sometimes a little residue remained if I didn't swallow it quickly enough. I then took out one of the unused pink pills from the blister pack he'd given me. I looked closely. The one I'd been taking, the ones in the current blister pack, had no markings. No tiny letters or numbers imprinted on them. I scrabbled for an old, empty blister pack from a previous prescription, one I'd picked up myself months ago before Mark started his helpful collections. There, on the back of the foil, were the pills. And each pink pill had a tiny AM5 imprinted on it. Each white one had B25. My breath hitched. I rushed to the bathroom, to the cabinet where I kept spare medications. I found an almost finished pack of bisoprolol that I'd forgotten about, from before Mark's assistance became so regular. I compared one of those official white pills, clearly marked, with the ones in my current weekly dispenser. The ones Mark had given me were blank. Smooth, anonymous, and terrifyingly inert. They weren't just a different brand. They felt different too, lighter somehow. I dropped one into a glass of water. It dissolved quickly, cloudily, leaving a slightly sweet residue at the bottom when I tentatively tasted the water. I did the same with one of the old, legitimate pills. It took longer to break down and had a distinctly bitter, chemical taste. Placebos. The word screamed in my mind. He had been feeding me sugar pills. For weeks? Months? How long had my son been actively, deliberately, withholding the medication that kept my heart from failing? The leaky faucet was forgotten. The rain outside was forgotten. All I could feel was a cold, sickening wave of realization. My own son, the child I had nursed, loved, sacrificed for. He was trying to harm me. Or worse. The thought was so monstrous I could barely comprehend it.
Why?
Why would he do this? The question swirled in my head, a vortex of confusion and pain. Then, I heard his car pull up outside.
Mark.
My Mark. Or rather, the stranger who wore his face. I didn't know what to do, what to say. My mind was a blank canvas of horror. He walked in, shaking the rain from his coat, a practiced, concerned smile on his face. Mom. How are you feeling today? You look a bit pale. I was probably translucent with shock. The casualness of his greeting, the blatant hypocrisy, struck me like a physical blow. This man asking about my health while actively undermining it. The audacity was breathtaking. I managed to mumble something about being tired. I couldn't look him in the eye. He bustled about, making a show of looking at the faucet, tutaying and saying he'd need a specific wrench he'd left at home. All the while I was watching him, really watching him, perhaps for the first time in years. The way his eyes darted around the room when he thought I wasn't looking, the slight impatience in his movements, the veneer of solicitude that now seemed so transparently false. How had I been so blind? He didn't stay long. He must have sensed something was off, despite my efforts to appear normal. My shock was too profound, my revulsion too new, to be entirely concealed. I'll sort the faucet next time, Mom. You just rest up, okay? Make sure you take your pills. The casual cruelty of that last remark, delivered with such an air of normalcy, was like a knife twisting in my gut. After he left, I sank into Arthur's armchair, the one Diane avoided, and the floodgates opened. I wept. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but the quiet, despairing tears of a woman whose world had just been shattered. My son, my own flesh and blood. The betrayal was so deep, so personal. It felt like a part of my soul had been carved out. Why, Mark? The question echoed in the silent room. Was it the house? My modest savings? Was I simply a burden he was eager to shed? I thought back over the past year. His increasing questions about my will, which Arthur and I had made years ago, leaving everything to him, naturally. His casual remarks about how big the house was for just one person. Diane's not-so-subtle comments about the lovely retirement communities nearby, complete with full medical care. They were painting a picture, I realize now, of an aging, ailing mother who would soon need more care than they were willing to provide, or perhaps whose assets they were keen to acquire sooner rather than later. Were they hoping I'd have a turn, a medical emergency that would make me seem incapable of managing my own affairs? Or worse, were they hoping for something more final? The thought made me physically sick. I got up, my legs unsteady, and went to the phone. My first instinct was to call Mark, to scream at him, to demand an explanation. But what explanation could there possibly be? What could he say that would undo this monstrous act? No, I needed to think. I needed to be calm, strategic. The tears had washed away some of the initial shock, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of anger and a surprising flicker of resolve. He had underestimated me. They both had. They saw an old woman, frail and fading. They didn't see the steel that Arthur used to say ran through my spine. They didn't see the mother lioness who, though perhaps aging, would still fight to protect herself. My mind raced. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. The placebos themselves were a start. I carefully collected the remaining fake pills, sealing them in a plastic bag, labeling it with the date. I retrieved the pharmacy receipt from the bin, smoothing it out. I thought about Dr. Evans. Should I call him? He'd been concerned. He would be horrified. But I needed more than just medical confirmation. I needed to understand the legal ramifications. I needed to protect myself. From my own son. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow, far more potent than the fakes he'd been feeding me. I thought of Sarah. Dear, perceptive Sarah. She would be a rock. I decided to call her first. Her number was on speed dial. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and familiar. Ellie? Is everything all right? You sound a bit shaky, Sarah, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. I need your help. Something terrible has happened. Something to do with Mark and my medication. Sarah was at my house within 20 minutes, her expression a mixture of concern and disbelief as I laid out my horrifying discovery on the kitchen table. The blank pills, the old, marked ones, the suspicious pharmacy receipt. She listened patiently, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm as my voice cracked with emotion. Unlike me, Sarah had never entirely trusted Mark, especially after Diane came into the picture. She'd always found him a bit too smooth, a bit too eager to please in a way that didn't feel genuine. Now, her eyes, usually twinkling with good humor, were narrowed with a fierce, protective anger on my behalf. That monster, she breathed, picking up one of the blank pills with a tissue as if it were contaminated. Ellie, this is beyond monstrous. This is criminal. Her outrage mirrored my own, but it was also fortifying. I wasn't alone in this. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice firm. That was the question, wasn't it? My mind, which had been a maelstrom of shock and grief, was slowly beginning to clear, anger providing a strange, sharp clarity. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I can't let this go. He could have killed me, Sarah. Slowly, perhaps, but deliberately, the words, spoken aloud, hung heavy in the air. First things first, Sarah said, practical as ever. We need to get you proper medication immediately. And you need to see Dr. Evans. He needs to know what's been happening. She was right. My health was paramount. The fear, the stress, the lack of proper medication, it was all taking its toll. I felt a tightness in my chest just thinking about it. Sarah helped me make an emergency appointment with Dr. Evans for the following morning. Then, her gaze hardened. And then, Ellie, you need a lawyer. A good one into lawyer. The words sounded so formal, so aggressive. But what Mark had done was an act of aggression, wasn't it? A betrayal of trust so profound that it severed the very bonds of family. Sarah knew someone, a woman named Monica Bryant, who specialized in elder law and, as Sarah put it, didn't suffer fools gladly. The thought of confronting Mark, of legal battles, was daunting. But the alternative, doing nothing, allowing him to continue this charade, perhaps to escalate his actions, was unthinkable. My resolve, which had flickered to life the previous evening, began to burn a little brighter, fueled by Sarah's unwavering support. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I locked my bedroom door, something I hadn't done in years. I had a small, emergency stash of my real medication, a few pills left over from an old prescription that I'd tucked away in a travel bag. I took one, my hand shaking, praying it would still be effective. The next morning, at Dr. Evans's office, the story tumbled out again. He listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. He took the samples I'd brought, promising to have them analyzed, though he said, with a grim certainty, that he had little doubt about what they'd find. He was appalled, professionally and personally. He'd known Mark since he was a boy, had attended Arthur's funeral. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "this is a serious matter. Beyond serious. You are put at significant risk." He immediately wrote me new prescriptions, emphasizing that I should get them filled myself at a different pharmacy, one Mark wouldn't know about. He also made detailed notes, his pen scratching angrily across my file. "If you decide to take this further, Eleanor, I will support you in any way I can. Medical records, testimony, whatever you need." His validation was another pillar of strength. Leaving his office, with legitimate prescriptions clutched in my hand and Sarah by my side, I felt a shift within me. The victim, Eleanor, was slowly making way for Eleanor, the survivor. The next call was to Monica Bryant. Monica Bryant's office was in a modern building downtown, a stark contrast to the comfortable clutter of my own home. It was all glass and steel and muted grays, efficient and a little intimidating. But Monica herself was surprisingly warm, though her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, with a no-nonsense haircut and a handshake that was firm and reassuring. Sarah came with me, a silent, supportive presence. I recounted my story for the third time in 24 hours, and it was no less horrifying with the repetition. I laid out the bag of placebos, the pharmacy receipt, and told her about Dr. Evans's willingness to help. Monica listened intently, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. She didn't interrupt, her gaze steady and empathetic. When I finished, my voice hoarse, she leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Henderson," she began, her tone calm but serious, "what your son has done is unconscionable. It's not just a betrayal of trust. It's potentially criminal endangerment, possibly even attempted assault. Depending on the specifics we can prove regarding his intent and the direct risk to your health." The legal terms sounded stark, chilling, but also strangely validating. This wasn't just a family squabble, it was something far more sinister. "The immediate priority," Monica continued, "is your safety and well-being. The fact that you're now taking the correct medication is the first step. The second is ensuring he cannot continue to harm you or have access to you in a way that makes you feel threatened." She paused, then asked, "What is it you want to achieve, Eleanor? What does justice look like to you in this situation?" It was a profound question. Did I want to see Mark in jail? The thought was horrifying. He was still my son, despite everything. But the alternative, allowing him to get away with this, to potentially try something else, was equally untenable. "I want him to stop," I said, my voice barely a whisper at first, then gaining strength. "I want him to understand the gravity of what he's done. I want to be safe in my own home. I don't want to live in fear of him, of what he might do next. I want him out of my life, at least until I can be sure he poses no threat." Monica nodded slowly. "A restraining order, or an order of protection as it's sometimes called, would be the most immediate way to achieve that physical separation and legal boundary. It would prevent him from contacting you, from coming to your home, or your usual places like Sarah's or the shops you frequent." She explained the process. "We would need to file a petition with the court, detailing the reasons for the request, providing evidence. There would likely be a hearing where Mark would have the opportunity to respond. It can be an emotionally taxing process, Eleanor," she warned. "He will likely be served with the papers, and his reaction could be unpredictable." I thought of Mark's smooth deceptions, his casual cruelty. The thought of facing him in court, of him trying to twist the narrative, made my stomach churn. But the image of living under his shadow, constantly looking over my shoulder, was worse. "What about the house?" I asked, a new worry surfacing. "It's in my name, but he acts like he has a claim already. We can also review your estate planning documents," Monica said. "Your will, any powers of attorney you may have in place. Given his recent actions, it would be prudent to ensure your wishes are protected and that he doesn't have any undue control over your affairs or assets, especially if you were to become incapacitated." The conversation then turned to evidence. The placebos were key. Dr. Evans's report confirming they were not my prescribed medication would be crucial. The pharmacy receipt, while circumstantial on its own, helped build a pattern when combined with the lack of prescriptions being filled for me there by him. Monica asked about any other instances of concerning behavior. I told her about his persistent questions regarding my finances, his suggestions about selling the house, Diane's comments about retirement homes. I even remembered how he'd helped me set up online banking a while back, insisting it was more convenient. A cold suspicion formed. Had he been monitoring my accounts? Or worse, Monica suggested we discreetly check my bank statements and credit reports for any unusual activity. The sheer number of things to consider was overwhelming, but Monica's calm, methodical approach was reassuring. She wasn't just a lawyer. She felt like a strategist, a protector. We spent over 2 hours with her that first day. By the time Sarah and I left, armed with a list of tasks and a plan of action, the heavy weight of fear had begun to be replaced by a sense of purpose. Mark had started this, but I was going to finish it. He had wanted to erase me, to make me fade away. Instead, he had ignited a spark. The fight for my safety, my dignity, and my peace of mind had begun. The days that followed were a blur of quiet activity, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. Under Monica's guidance, I began to meticulously gather the threads of my son's betrayal. It felt like detective work, but the quarry was my own child, and the crime scene was my own life. Sarah was my steadfast companion, her presence a silent source of strength. She helped me go through months of bank statements, line by line. At first, everything seemed normal, my pension deposits, regular bill payments for utilities, groceries. But then, Sarah, with her sharper eyes for detail, pointed to a recurring monthly withdrawal, not large, just a couple of $100, listed as an online transfer to an account number I didn't recognize. It had started about 6 months ago, roughly around the time I began to feel consistently unwell, around the time Mark's helpfulness with my prescriptions had become a regular fixture. My blood ran cold. $200 a month. Not enough to break me, but enough to be a steady drain, enough for him and Diane to enjoy a few extra dinners out, perhaps. Or maybe it was funding something else. The betrayal deepened, layer by insidious layer. He wasn't just trying to harm my health. He was also, it seemed, quietly siphoning off my money. Monica was grim when I reported this. This strengthens our case for the restraining order, Eleanor. It paints a picture of exploitation alongside the endangerment. She advised me to immediately contact my bank, report the unauthorized transfers, and change my account numbers and online passwords. The bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson whom I'd known for years, was shocked and incredibly supportive. She helped me secure my accounts and start the fraud investigation process. It was humiliating to admit that my own son was likely stealing from me, but Mrs. Peterson handled it with utmost discretion and empathy. Dr. Evans, true to his word, provided a sworn affidavit. It detailed my medical condition, the critical nature of my prescribed medication, and the laboratory analysis of the pills Mark had been giving me. The lab confirmed they contained no active medicinal ingredients. They were, indeed, placebos. His report was stark and unequivocal about the serious health risks I had been exposed to. Each piece of evidence felt like a small stone added to a growing wall of protection around me. I also started a journal, as Monica suggested, documenting every interaction with Mark, however brief, every unsettling comment, every instance where I felt uneasy or pressured. Looking back, there were so many small red flags I had dismissed, blinded by maternal affection or simply by a reluctance to believe the worst. His impatience when I took too long to understand something he was explaining about my finances. Diane's saccharine compliments that always seemed to have a hidden barb. Their joint suggestions that perhaps the garden was becoming too much for me. It was all part of a larger, uglier picture that was now coming into sharp focus. The hardest part was preparing my own affidavit for the restraining order. Monica helped me draft it, ensuring it was factual, clear, and emotionally honest without being overly dramatic. Recounting the events, putting into words the depth of Mark's deception and the fear it had instilled in me, was incredibly painful. I had to relive the dawning horror, the sickening realization of his betrayal. There were moments when I wanted to stop, to retreat, to pretend none of this was happening. But then I would look at the small, harmless-looking pills, the placebos, that represented such a monstrous violation of trust, and my resolve would harden. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about sending a message that such actions have consequences. During this period, Mark continued to call, his voice a smooth balm of false concern. "How are you feeling, Mom? Are you remembering to take your pills?" Each word was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of his duplicity. I kept my responses brief, non-committal. "I'm managing, Mark. I didn't let on that I knew. I couldn't, not yet." Monica had advised me to act as normally as possible until the papers were served. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Diane, too, would sometimes call, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Eleanor, darling, Mark tells me you're still not feeling quite yourself. We're so worried about you. Perhaps it's time we had a serious chat about your care options, my care options." The audacity. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew about their despicable scheme. But I held my tongue, biting back the angry words, clinging to Monica's counsel. "Wait. Gather your strength. Let the law take its course." The process of changing my will was another emotionally fraught step. My previous will, drafted when Arthur was alive, left everything to Mark, our only child. It was a natural, loving disposition. Now, staring at that document, it felt like a testament to my naivety. Monica explained my options. I could disinherit him completely, or leave him a nominal sum, or set up a trust with strict conditions. After much soul-searching, I decided to amend my will to leave the bulk of my estate to a few chosen charities that had been important to Arthur and me, and a significant portion to Sarah, my loyal friend who had shown me more genuine care and concern than my own son. To Mark, I left $1. A single, symbolic dollar. It wasn't about the money, it was about the statement. You are not entitled to the fruits of a love you so callously betrayed. Signing the new will felt like closing a painful chapter and taking another step towards reclaiming my life and my autonomy. The legal machinery was now in motion. Monica filed the petition for the restraining order. A court date was set. The next step was serving Mark with the papers. The thought filled me with a mixture of dread and a grim sense of anticipation. The confrontation was coming. The day Mark was to be served with the restraining order papers, a nervous energy thrummed through me. Monica had arranged for a professional process server, a discreet but firm individual, to deliver the documents to Mark at his workplace. She felt it was better than him being served at home, potentially in front of Diane, which could escalate things unpredictably, or him being served at my house, which was out of the question. I spent the morning pacing, unable to settle. Sarah came over, bringing a thermos of chamomile tea and an air of calm that I desperately needed. "It's the right thing to do, Ellie," she said softly, watching me wear a path in my living room carpet. "You have to protect yourself." I knew she was right, but the finality of it, the severing of a bond, however damaged, was still a heavy weight. What would he do? How would he react? Would he be angry? Violent? Would he try to deny it, to manipulate his way out of it as he had manipulated me for so long? Monica had warned me to expect a strong reaction. People like your son, who are used to being in control and getting their own way through deception, don't take kindly to having that control wrested from them, she'd said. He will likely try to contact you, to plead, to threaten, to gaslight you into believing you're mistaken or cruel. You must not engage. Let the order speak for you. Let me speak for you. Around mid-afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My heart leaped into my throat. Sarah looked at me, her eyebrows raised. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, it rang again. Mark's number. I stared at it, the sound jangling my nerves. Again, I let it go. Then came a barrage of text messages. "Mom, what is this? What have you done? This is insane. You can't do this to me. There's been a terrible mistake. We need to talk. Now, Mom, pick up the phone. Are you there? This is slander. I'm your son." His words, even in text form, were laced with a frantic, indignant energy. The self-pity, the outrage, it was all there. Not a hint of remorse, not a flicker of understanding for what he had done to me. Just pure, unadulterated fury that his scheme had been uncovered and his comfortable arrangement disrupted. Then Diane started. Texts from her number, equally hysterical, accusing me of trying to tear their family apart, of being ungrateful, of being manipulated by that interfering Sarah. I showed the messages to Sarah, who just snorted. Ungrateful? The nerve of that woman. The process server called Monica to confirm that Mark had been served. He had apparently turned pale, then red, and had initially refused to take the papers before snatching them with a string of muttered curses. Monica relayed this to me, advising me again to remain strong and not respond to any attempts at contact. The restraining order explicitly forbade him from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within a certain distance of my home or person. Any violation would be a matter for the police. That evening, there was a knock at my door. Not a gentle knock, but a hard, insistent banging. My heart hammered against my ribs. I peered through the peephole. It was Mark. His face was contorted with anger, his eyes wild. He was violating the order already.
Mom.
Open this door. We need to talk about this nonsense. You can't just accuse me of these things. His voice was loud, carrying through the thick wood of the door. Sarah, who was still with me, immediately called the police, just as Monica had instructed us to do if he showed up. I stood frozen, a few feet back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. He rattled the doorknob. Mom, I know you're in there. Stop this madness. Diane is distraught. You're destroying our lives. Destroying his life. What about what he had done to mine? The sheer, unmitigated gall of it finally broke through my fear, igniting a cold, hard anger. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I just stood there listening to his tirade, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This raging, entitled man outside my door was not the son I had loved and raised. He was a stranger, a dangerous one. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 minutes before I heard the wail of a siren approaching. Mark must have heard it too, because the banging stopped abruptly. I risked another look through the peephole. He was backing away from the door, his face a mask of fury and something else, perhaps a flicker of fear now that the consequences of his actions were becoming real. 2 police officers arrived. Sarah spoke to them through the closed door at first, explaining the situation, showing them a copy of the restraining order through the mail slot. They were calm, professional. They spoke to Mark, who was still lingering by the gate, his voice now lower, trying to sound reasonable, victimized. I heard snippets of his conversation. Misunderstanding, my mother is confused. She's being influenced, the usual deflections. The officers were not swayed. They informed him sternly that he was in violation of a court order and instructed him to leave the premises immediately. They warned him that any further contact or breach would result in his arrest. He argued for a moment, then, seeing their implacable expressions, he finally turned and stalked off to his car, slamming the door before screeching away from the curb. The silence he left behind was profound. The officers stayed for a few more minutes, ensuring I was all right, offering advice on documenting the incident. They were kind, respectful. After they left, Sarah made us another cup of tea, her hands shaking slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed. Well, she said, letting out a long breath. That was intense.
But you did it, Ellie.
You stood your ground. I sank onto the sofa, drained but resolute. The confrontation had been terrifying, but it was also, in a strange way, liberating. I had faced his rage, his manipulation, and I hadn't buckled. The restraining order wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of safety, a fragile bud of peace in the storm he had created. He had tried to silence me, to diminish me, but instead, I had found my voice, and it was stronger than I ever imagined. The immediate aftermath of Mark being served and his subsequent attempt to intimidate me at my home was a tense period. My phone continued to receive a barrage of texts and calls from blocked numbers, or from numbers I didn't recognize, which I correctly assumed were him or Diane trying to circumvent the order. I meticulously documented every attempt, forwarding the information to Monica as she had instructed. She, in turn, formally notified Mark's lawyer. He had, predictably, lawyered up almost immediately of these breaches, warning that further violations would compel us to seek enforcement through the courts, which could include contempt charges. This seemed to have some effect, as the direct contact attempts dwindled, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of his anger simmering just out of sight. The world suddenly felt smaller, yet my home, the place he had tried to turn into a trap, began to feel like a sanctuary again. I changed the locks, a symbolic and practical measure that brought an unexpected sense of relief. Sarah helped me install a simple security camera overlooking the front porch, another small step towards reclaiming my peace of mind. The upcoming court hearing for the final restraining order loomed large in my thoughts. Monica was preparing diligently, confident in our case, but warning me that Mark would likely try to paint himself as the victim, a concerned son misunderstood by an aging, perhaps confused, mother. The thought of him trying to discredit me, to twist my legitimate fears into signs of senility, was infuriating, but Monica assured me that the evidence, the placebos, Dr. Evans's testimony, the bank records, spoke for itself. During this time, I focused on my health. With the correct medication, the terrible fatigue began to lift. The frightening palpitations subsided. I could walk to the shops again, without feeling like I was about to collapse. The simple act of breathing freely, without that constant tightness in my chest, felt like a miracle. It was a stark, daily reminder of what Mark had tried to take from me. I also found solace in my garden. The physical work of weeding, pruning, and planting was therapeutic. As new life pushed through the soil, I felt a parallel sense of renewal within myself. My roses, which had been somewhat neglected during my illness, began to bloom, their vibrant colors a defiant splash against the grayness of the preceding months. News of the situation, despite our efforts at discretion, inevitably began to filter out to the wider family and our small community. Some were shocked, disbelieving at first. Mark had always presented such a charming, dutiful facade. Diane, too, was known for her polished exterior. But as whispers turned into more concrete information, my visible improvement in health once I was away from Mark's care, the undeniable fact of a restraining order, opinions began to shift. I received a few awkward calls from distant relatives, unsure what to say, offering vague support. More heartening were the gestures from unexpected quarters. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a quiet woman I'd only ever exchanged polite greetings with, brought over a freshly baked apple pie. "I heard you've been having a tough time, Eleanor," she said, her eyes kind. "Just wanted you to know some folks are thinking of you." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It reminded me that while one crucial bond had been catastrophically broken, other connections, however tenuous, could offer comfort and strength. The bank investigation into the unauthorized transfers concluded. They confirmed the funds had been moved to an account in Mark's name. They were able to reverse some of the most recent transactions and started proceedings to recover the rest. It was another piece of the ugly puzzle falling into place, another confirmation of his calculated deceit. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like my old self, yet fundamentally changed. The naivety was gone, replaced by a wary resilience. The blind maternal love had been scarred, but in its place was a fierce determination to protect the life I had left, to live it authentically and safely. Sarah remained my rock, always ready with a listening ear, a practical suggestion, or simply a shared cup of tea and a moment of normalcy. She helped me navigate the emotional minefield, reminding me that his actions were a reflection of his character, not of my worth as a mother or a person. The lead-up to the court date was filled with a quiet dread, but also a sense of inevitability. This was the next step, the necessary confrontation to secure a more permanent peace. Monica walked me through what to expect, how to present myself, how to answer questions truthfully and calmly, without letting Mark's lawyer, she anticipated he would be aggressive, rattle me. "Remember, Eleanor," she said, "you are telling the truth. The truth has a power all its own." The day of the court hearing arrived, gray and overcast, much like my mood. Sarah drove me to the courthouse, her presence a silent reassurance. Monica met us there, impeccably dressed, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the churning anxiety in my stomach. Walking into the courtroom felt like stepping onto a stage for a play I never wanted to be a part of. Mark was already there, sitting beside a stern-looking man in a suit, presumably his lawyer. Mark looked pale and drawn, but his eyes, when they briefly met mine, were cold and resentful. Diane was not present, which Monica noted with a slight, knowing nod. Perhaps his lawyer advised her presence might not be helpful to their case. The proceedings began, formal and a little bewildering at first. Monica presented our case first, laying out the facts clearly and concisely. My medical condition, my reliance on specific medication, the discovery of the placebos provided by Mark, Dr. Evans's corroborating affidavit, the unauthorized financial transactions, and Mark's aggressive behavior after being served with a temporary order. She submitted the evidence, the lab reports, the bank statements, photos of the different pills, my journal entries. It felt strange to hear my life, my fear, my betrayal, laid out in such stark, legal terms, yet there was also a sense of validation in it. Then it was Mark's lawyer's turn. He tried to paint a picture of me as an elderly woman, perhaps confused, forgetful, easily influenced by others, a pointed look towards Sarah in the gallery. He suggested Mark was a devoted son, merely trying to manage his mother's complex medication regimen, and that any errors were unintentional, a misunderstanding. He even floated the idea that I might have mixed up the pills myself. The insinuation that I was incompetent, that I was imagining things or being manipulated, stung deeply. I could feel my cheeks flush with anger, but I remembered Monica's advice. Stay calm, let her handle it. And handle it she did. On cross-examination, Monica was masterful. She questioned Mark directly. Her voice was never raised, never accusatory, but her questions were like precision scalpels, dissecting his carefully constructed facade of a concerned son. Mr. Henderson, she asked, if you were merely helping your mother manage her medication, why did you not use the pills prescribed by her doctor and dispensed by her usual pharmacy? Mark stammered something about trying to find a more cost-effective generic version, a claim that fell apart when Monica presented evidence that my prescribed medication was fully covered by my insurance and had minimal copay. And these cost-effective pills, Monica pressed, did they come in official pharmacy packaging? Did they have any manufacturer markings as all legitimate medications do? He mumbled about them being from a reputable online supplier, but he couldn't produce any receipts or details. Mr. Henderson, when your mother felt increasingly unwell, did you suggest she see her doctor immediately? Or did you tell her she was just overdoing it? He shifted uncomfortably. I was concerned, of course, but you didn't think her worsening symptoms might be related to the new pills you were providing? His answers became increasingly evasive, contradictory. He denied any knowledge of the unauthorized bank transfers, suggesting his account might have been hacked, an explanation that sounded feeble even to my ears. When Monica questioned him about his aggressive behavior at my door, he claimed he was simply desperate to understand what was happening, that he was worried about me. The judge, an older woman with a perceptive gaze, listened intently, her expression unreadable. I was called to testify. Walking to the stand, my legs felt like lead. But as I sat there, under oath, and began to speak, a strange calm descended. I simply told my story. I described how I had felt, the growing weakness, the fear. I recounted the discovery of the placebos, the shock, the betrayal. I spoke of the unauthorized bank transfers. I looked directly at Mark only once, briefly. There was no recognition in his eyes, no remorse, only a sullen anger. His lawyer tried to fluster me, asking pointed questions about my memory, my health, suggesting I was being vindictive. But I held firm, answering truthfully, my voice quiet but steady. I loved my son, I said, my voice catching slightly. I trusted him. He used that trust to harm me, to endanger my life, and to steal from me. All I want now is to be safe. When I stepped down, I felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely cleansed. I had spoken my truth in a court of law. The rest was out of my hands. After a short recess, the judge returned. She spoke for several minutes, summarizing the evidence. She noted the credible and disturbing testimony from Dr. Evans and myself. She pointed to the clear pattern of deception and exploitation on Mark's part. Then, she delivered her ruling. The restraining order was granted for a period of 2 years. Mark was forbidden from any contact, direct or indirect, from coming within 500 yards of my home, my person, or places I frequented. He was ordered to return any of my property still in his possession and to have no involvement in my financial or medical affairs. A gasp escaped Mark. His lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm. I felt a wave of profound relief wash over me, so intense it almost brought me to tears. It was over. Justice in this small, specific way had been served. Monica squeezed my arm. Sarah, behind me, let out a quiet sigh. As we left the courtroom, I didn't look at Mark again. He was part of a past I was determined to leave behind. The finality of the judge's ruling echoed in the quiet car ride home with Sarah. 2 years. 2 years of legally mandated peace, of safety. It felt like a lifetime, a gift I hadn't dared to hope for with such certainty. The relief was immense, yet it was tinged with a deep, inevitable sadness. A door had been closed, a relationship irrevocably severed. There would be no reconciliation, no apology sought or given. Mark had made his choices, and now he and I had to live with the consequences. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled over my life. The absence of Mark's manipulative presence, the cessation of his calls and Diane's saccharine intrusions was like the lifting of a suffocating blanket. I could breathe again, truly breathe. I continued to see Monica to finalize a few remaining matters. We ensured the new will was securely lodged, and she helped me draft letters to various institutions, formally revoking any authority Mark might have previously held over my affairs. Each signature felt like another small act of reclamation. The bank eventually recovered a portion of the stolen funds, though not all. The emotional cost of his theft far outweighed the monetary loss, but there was a grim satisfaction in seeing some measure of accountability. Mark, from what I heard indirectly through a distant cousin who still had some contact with his side of the family, did not take his defeat well. He was reportedly bitter, resentful, and increasingly isolated. Diane, apparently, was finding his brooding presence and their somewhat tarnished social standing rather trying. There was a certain poetic justice in that, though I found no joy in their unhappiness, only a weary acknowledgement of choices made and paths taken. My health continued to improve. With the correct medication and the absence of constant stress, I felt more energetic than I had in years. I rejoined my weekly walking group, something I'd had to give up when I was so unwell. I started volunteering at the local library a couple of mornings a week, a quiet, fulfilling activity that brought me into contact with new people and new stories. My garden flourished under my renewed care. The roses were spectacular that summer. Their scent filled the air, a fragrant reminder of life's resilience. Mrs. Gable from next door and I struck up a genuine friendship, often sharing cups of tea and gardening tips over the fence. Sarah, of course, remained a constant, her friendship a bedrock in my new landscape. We didn't talk much about Mark anymore. There was no need. The focus was on the present, on the future, on the small joys and quiet routines that made up a life well lived. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent, I would think of him. Not the angry, deceitful man he had become, but the little boy who had clung to my hand, whose laughter had filled these rooms. A pang of loss would inevitably follow, a grief for the son I thought I had, the son I had loved. It was a scar that would always remain, a tender spot in my heart. But the overwhelming feeling was one of peace. I had faced betrayal, faced my own fear, and I had not only survived but emerged stronger, more discerning, and more appreciative of the true value of honesty, loyalty, and self-preservation. I learned that underestimation can be a powerful weapon, not for the one who wields it, but for the one who is its target and rises above it. Mark had seen an old woman, a burden, an easy mark. He failed to see the mother who had given him life, the woman who still possessed a core of unyielding strength. He thought he could erase me, But in trying to do so, he only succeeded in erasing himself from my life, from my legacy. My home was once again a place of safety, of comfort, filled not with the ghosts of betrayal, but with the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. The restraining order was a piece of paper, yes, but it represented so much more: my right to safety, my dignity, my voice. And in the end, those were the things truly worth fighting for. The peace I found was hard-won, but it was mine, and I treasured it more than words can say.